many media and politicians don't care enough about the issue to be honest about it. The grievance industry is in it for the money and power, and the far left simply refuses to confront the basic problem because it does not fit their ideology. Thus, nothing gets done, and racial divisions grow wider.
We're always grateful when an oracle stoops down and offers his insights into the complexity of race relations in America. And then we have Mr. Bill O'Reilly. During yet another Mad Monday segment, Mr. O'Reilly decided to go beyond simply blaming African-American communities for every urban failing, and instead added a new attack on the media for failing to cover both sides when it comes to racial violence.
Few national media even covered the story because it was blacks attacking a white. In the wake of Trayvon Martin, if it had been 3 white boys attacking a black, there would have been massive media coverage.
Can you imagine how angry Mr. O'Reilly would have been if George Zimmerman had been found guilty? For more now, I'm joined by MSNBC contributor Goldie Taylor and the Director of Africana Studies at Lehigh University, Professor James Peterson. Professor Peterson, he says there's not enough news coverage of African Americans attacking whites. All we've had for the last 3 months has been African Americans portrayed as criminals, thugs, delinquents. I'm only surprised that they haven't blamed Dr. Horace Raines, who was born in 1912, for the sinking of the Titanic.
Yeah, I have very little patience for this kind of misdirection, what I think are some of the most important conversations and important discourses and important action that we must take to address racial injustices and racial inequality in our society. At the end of the day, it always comes down to these kind of folk like Bill O'Reilly comparing apples to oranges. This particular case that he's referencing, one, please note that the 3 young men have been charged, and they allegedly will end up in an adult court for those crimes. And so that's part of the reason why that this didn't make national news. You know, some of the things that he's trying to compare it to, like Zimmerman or the Trayvon Martin situation, please remember that Mr. Zimmerman was not arrested for some 45 days. And so we couldn't even get the wheels of justice to begin to turn on his behalf. And then you put that in the context of stand your ground and all the other issues that we've been wrestling with in terms of racial bias in the criminal justice system, things like stop and frisk, mandatory minimums, all of that stuff, you know, that weighs into those kinds of situations, and that's why you get that kind of response. To compare it to this particular incident just doesn't make a lot of sense.
Well, it is also inaccurate. Goldie, why are these people so angry? We've had the re-emergence of Trump and his birtherism nonsense. We've had video this week of a rodeo clown dressed as the president. We've had racial epithets thrown at the president in Arizona. Aren't they satisfied that their puerile racism is still alive and well in America?
You know, I really wish that I could explain it, Martin, but it really does boil down to this. Each of us carries with us a cultural lens that allows us to see or not see things that are pervasive in our society. And so Bill O'Reilly does not have the same cultural lens or socialization as I may have. And so he sees these issues play themselves out in a very different way. Some people may call that privilege. I do. I think that Bill O'Reilly does not have to see some of the injustices that are perpetrated across this country, especially in terms of communities of color or poor, distressed, economically distressed communities. He doesn't have to see them because he doesn't have to live them. And so he can sit on his perch and he can make these kinds of unfounded attacks without really any backlash from anyone really other than us. But to make popular media the culprit in this, I think really takes it just a bridge or a step too far. Anyone who speaks about racial injustice must then be a racist themselves. And so I find that argument sort of faulty on its face, and I simply refuse to engage it most of the time.
And yet the reality is, Professor Peterson, it has to be engaged because otherwise these untruths continue to take on mythic status and people end up believing that Trayvon Martin chased George Zimmerman or Trayvon Martin provoked this incident or Trayvon... Do you see what I'm saying? What I'm saying is there is a necessity to get to the truth, as you just elucidated in the case that Mr. O'Reilly was referencing, because if we don't do that, these stories just take on a legend of their own.
Well, it is important to do that. I worry that there's not enough cross-pollination between the audiences to kind of correct some of the damage and the corrosive nature of some of these kinds of comments. I mean, just to boil down what's really kind of what's at stake here, a lot of folk like Bill O'Reilly, or people who agree with or think like Bill O'Reilly, want to sort of tidy up all of our racial problems along the lines or within the discussions of behavior, within the discussions of the kinds of choices that black people and people of color make, but they never want to talk about structural issues. They never want to talk about poverty. They never want to talk about
institutional racism
like we see in the criminal justice system. They never want to talk about income inequality. They never want to talk about
educational
biases in terms
opportunity,
of lending, or biases in terms of housing. Exactly. And so we can't have a conversation because we're having two different conversations, and that's